The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our software automation webinar series. My name is Sasha Pizzoli. I'm a marketing coordinator at SWK, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon. Today, I'll be joined by Russ Graf, Vice President of Sales at NetStock, and today he will be walking you through how to drive more profit from your inventory. Just a few housekeeping items. All lines will be muted during the presentation. We're going to be recording this session and distribute the webinar to you in a few days for your convenience. If you have any questions, please type in the chat box at the bottom of your GoToWebinar sidebar and then hit send question to staff at any time during the webinar. We'll be going through questions at the end of the presentation. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started with our presentation.
All right, thanks, Sasha. As Sasha mentioned, my name is Russ Graf. I'm Vice President of Sales at NetStock, which is the author and publisher of the application Sage Inventory Advisor. And been around this space for a long time, was a reselling partner of Sage 100 and its predecessor branded names for well over 20 years, and have worked in the channel for over 30 years altogether. And last 5 years with NetStock. So thanks for all of you that are in attendance today. I really appreciate you taking the time. As mentioned, our topic today is how do I drive more profit from our inventory? And we've got a lot to cover here in the next 30 or 40 minutes or so. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A as well. So feel free to enter those into the chat box, as Sasha mentioned. So at NetStock, we work with small and medium-sized businesses across the country and really around the globe, since we are a global firm. And of course, these are inventory-based companies, so distributors, manufacturers, retailers. Increasingly, we see a lot of e-tailers or combination of e-tailing with those other kinds of businesses. Building their own e-commerce website environments. And so for the most part, the value of the inventory is one of the largest assets on their balance sheet, if not the largest. And either way, it certainly is core to the business, right? So managing it well is really critical to overall profitability. So when we think about how the majority of these businesses manage that critical asset, certainly most firms have an accounting software or an ERP application at the base, right? So in this environment today, we're talking to Sage 100 users, and maybe a few other Sage ERP application users have joined us as well. And so that application certainly does a good job of capturing transactions and so forth, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we also see lots of third-party add-ons being used in these environments for all variety of reasons. In the case of an inventory environment, it's not uncommon to see barcoding type application or warehouse management, excuse me, solution being applied and added to the ERP environment. And then, of course, we see lots of use of Excel spreadsheets in the mix for doing a variety of different things. And some of them appropriate, and in some cases, we'll talk about where it may not be as appropriate in terms of managing the inventory challenges that we'll talk about. But before we dig into that in a little bit more depth, I just want to give this a little bit of context, because there's a difference between what I would call the kind of the two sides of the inventory management coin: inventory control and inventory replenishment. So when we use the phrase inventory management as kind of a broader term, usually what we think of first, what our mind goes to, is really this inventory control component of that, which is the handling of the physical product, right? The shipping, receiving, pick, pack. Maybe we've got bin management going on, individual bins within the warehouse locations. Often entails, this is where we see the use of barcoding and so forth to help drive physical counts, hopefully doing cycle counting of your more important items and so forth. So we'll see barcode labels and handheld devices and so forth, scanners as part of that solution. And so this component of the inventory management, the inventory control piece, certainly does a great job and an important job of telling us what product is where, right, and in what quantities. Clearly have to have an understanding of that to be able to manage and properly sell and buy and move inventory around. Maybe if I got multiple locations, making sure that I've got those identified well and so forth. So in our ERP applications, our Sage 100 and other Sage ERPs really do an excellent job of tracking, again, all these transactions, all the ins and outs and movement of that product. Critically important, but it's not the whole story, right? It doesn't tell us if what we have on hand is the right quantity of product at the right place at the right time. So this is kind of the flip side of the coin that we sometimes call inventory replenishment or optimization. You may hear the phrase demand planning. So those are all the other components that that help us set the goal of what's our future demand look like? What do we need to buy? Where do we need to prioritize? All those things are the function of this demand planning or replenishment or optimization environment, doing forecasting and proper purchasing. And this, unfortunately, is where we often see Excel being used to augment some of the functionality in the ERP. Before we get into that in depth, let's talk a little bit about what the issues are and kind of what the impact is on firms when inventory is not optimized, when we're not doing this well and we have challenges. So it can result in really several things, but three key things that I would like to address here. First is we often run out of our more popular items. Secondly, we end up accumulating too much of other stock, right? We have excess of some items while we're running out of the others. And in the meantime, a lot of wasted time and effort, a lot of lost productivity by the folks that are in charge of managing this balancing act between these two things. But clearly the worst thing that can happen is running out of product, right? When a customer has a need. Not only do you risk losing that sale if a customer can go elsewhere, especially if it's a more commoditized item, but if they go elsewhere and get what they need, and they have a positive experience with your competitor, you may lose that customer altogether, right? And we all understand that we live in this Amazon-driven world of expectations today, and it can be really hard to recover that. And I can tell you that customer loyalty is not what it once was. So if our customers have to go elsewhere because we don't have product to meet their needs, highly risky, very expensive environment, really a big challenge. But unfortunately, the way most firms solve that problem is simply by buying too much, right? I can't afford to run out, so I'm willing to overbuy and overstock just so that I can meet those demands. And you see a lot of websites that talk about, how much inventory we have on hand and immediate turnaround, and we're always in stock and all that kind of stuff. It actually becomes a marketing angle, and that's fine to get that message out. But the reality is, having too much inventory is also a big problem. And many companies don't fully understand the downside of that challenge, of that condition. And so to me, the biggest problem in all that is the working capital that's tied up in inventory sitting on warehouse shelves, right? That's some serious money in many cases that could be used elsewhere in the firm to fund other profit generating initiatives. So, and who on this call, in any small and medium-sized businesses, really doesn't struggle with managing cash flow on occasion, if not all the time, right? Cash is king. So every small business and medium-sized business, really, that's a big challenge. And here we are sitting with a stash of cash right there in the warehouse gathering dust instead of being put to use. So that's a big problem with having excess inventory. But the other problem is even a little bit more tangible, and that's because there are actual hard costs associated with that excess inventory. These are called carrying costs. I'm sure you've heard the term and understand it, but it includes things like taxes and insurance, and there can be shrinkage, from breakage or obsolescence. We've got to count it and move it around, and it takes up warehouse space and so forth. So there's a lot of actual hard costs, out-of-pocket costs that are tied to that inventory. And it's a cost of doing business when it's on a proper level of inventory, but when it's excess inventory, that's also costing us that cost that's in excess. That's a real profit drain. And experts will tell you that number is typically around 20% or so of the value of the inventory. So if we do some just quick back of the envelope math on this, and we often find 20-30% excess is very common for customers that we pick up and we apply our tools and our process to. We find 20-30% is not at all uncommon. But just for easy math and to be conservative with our numbers, let's just use a 10% figure. Let's say you're sitting on 10% of excess inventory, which actually would be pretty conservative. And again, for easy math, let's assume you've got, say, $1 million in inventory on the books, and you can extrapolate the math from there that applies for you. But so very conservatively, that would mean that you've got $100,000 worth of excess inventory. And I don't mean buffer stock or safety stock. This is real excess, right? True above and beyond what you really need to manage your safety stock, true excess. $100,000, that's a lot of capital doing nothing for you, all right, that you could be used elsewhere. And on top of that, if we use our 20% carrying cost model, that's $20,000 a year of hard costs out the door. right? Almost $1,700 a month, if my math is right, needlessly, every month, every year, ongoing. And this is, again, a very conservative number. More likely it's like twice or three times these numbers in many cases. So you need to be thinking about what your number is, right? Are you at 10%, 15%, 20% or more? Right? So you can do your own calculations to see what that's costing you. But then I also alluded to the third challenge here is this productivity issue, right? Our buyers and planners that are responsible for managing these two competing interests, having enough but not too much, right? So, seems to we see an awful lot of stress in that role. People running around putting out fires, expediting orders, getting yelled at from different constituents, right? The sales manager's always mad because you're running out of stuff. The CFO or accounting folks are mad because you've got too much inventory, and you're trying to do this balancing act, and so you're managing through all kinds of insufficient tools to try to get a handle on it. And as a result, those folks are not taking the time or don't have the time to proactively manage the supply chain, right? To negotiate better pricing, better shipping terms, and all the other things that really are actually more interesting and fun about that role in the organization. So they just never even get to that because they're constantly stressed and putting out fires was what we see often. So the real problem is a lack of good analytics, right? A lack of insight as to what's going on in that valuable asset of inventory. And we saw a study recently, which we highlight here, where only about a third of supply chain executives said that they have the proper tools and processes to give them real insight into the health of their inventory. That's really surprising and sad, really, because as we've just discussed, it's very expensive. And you'd think that we could do better than that. And of course, we can. So let's talk about a couple other things. I mean, again, what about all those accounting and ERP software packages that are out there in the world? What about Sage 100 and the other Sage ERP applications that are in use? Can't those products and those applications right? It's generally available to everybody in the company. It's on your desktop, and it's generally pretty easy to use, especially at a basic level. Got some familiarity, all the common interface and all the Microsoft Office environments and so forth, so it's pretty easy to navigate. And you can actually manage some very complex calculations, right? We've all seen Excel wizards. Maybe you are one, or you've got others on your team and your organization that can really produce some amazing worksheets and some great calculations. So it seems like the reasonable choice, right? It's cost-free, and it can be pretty effective in terms of building complex environments. So you would see the logic of that. But is it really, right? Is it really free? We would say that there's an awful lot of hidden costs associated with trying to use an inadequate tool, try to take this blank spreadsheet and build a model that is going to try to approach some sort of a best practices approach. And it's just not going to get there, right? It's just not, it's suited for so many great things on the financial side. It's an absolute game changer in many businesses for the years that it's been around, but we would say it's not well suited for the challenges of inventory management. And we'll talk about some of the reasons here. And actually, we've done an entire series of webinars and blog posts just strictly on this topic, drilling really deeply into the issue of inventory spreadsheets. We'll just cover it at a high level today, but just to give you a feel, I mean, obviously this is all about accuracy, right, and data. So you've got to grab data from the ERP application, things like stock balances and sales histories and data and open purchase orders and purchase histories and so forth. So you've got all these files, typically 8, 10, 12 different files sitting in the ERP database, all very well organized, right? Well organized, well documented. We understand what data is in there and what the file formats are and what the data formats are. And that's great because our Sage applications and all of our ERP systems do a great job of capturing all that transactional data all day long, where our teams are banging away, putting in orders, et cetera. But now I've got to go grab that data, right? And of course, if you upgrade versions of your ERP or if you upgrade versions of Excel, sometimes we may see some changes in functions and structure, and got to make those adjustments. So it's time consuming, but it's doable. It's not rocket science to get to that. But a big challenge as part of that is really the synchronization or the timing of that data extraction, right? How am I going to grab the data and keep it all in sync? If you come in the office at 9 in the morning and dump stock balances, and then at 10 o'clock you dump the open POs, and then again you've got these 8 or 10 files that you have to work through. There's no way that you're going to be able to do that without having other people in the system still entering transactions, unless you come in at 5 or 6 in the morning or come in on a Saturday or something. And even in many environments that doesn't work, right? Our operations, especially in an e-commerce environment, are taking orders all day long, et cetera. So there's constant changing of that quality of that data. And so you can imagine that it's never really going to be in sync. So you've already got accuracy challenges there. But even beyond that, I think there's actually a control issue, and this is a big one for me, right? Who's in charge of that master or monster spreadsheet? We've heard it termed both ways by our customers, right? Who else can make changes and updates? Who understands what's going on in the calculations of the formulas in that spreadsheet, or understand the outputs that we're getting from that spreadsheet, right? Typically, that's one person, and that's a real risk factor. Maybe I've got somebody else that's cross-trained at a high level or at a minimal level for how to manage that system. But when that manager or that person that's in charge of that spreadsheet is out sick or on vacation, we're at risk. Or worse, what if that person leaves the company? And we hear these stories all the time that, hey, I had this person that built this fantastic thing and he knew how to make it work, and when he left, nobody else knew how to work it. And if you've ever done any programming or coding or picked up someone else's spreadsheet, that can actually be very challenging to understand the logic and flow and to audit through that process. It can be pretty tough. And so that control issue is a real risk factor for me. But then there's other stuff, right? There's all kinds of other additional inputs, things like vendor lead times and how do I segregate or classify my products? What about that safety or buffer stock level that I need to have? How often do I buy certain items? Do I treat all these items the same way, or can I get some uniqueness factored in there? You may have other circumstances due to the type of product that you sell or make. Maybe you kit some things. So you've got bills of materials to manage. Maybe you create lots of new SKUs. Maybe you've got multiple warehouses and you've got some warehouses that are replenished by a central distribution center for some items, but other items are purchased directly from a supplier. So just an awful lot of challenges involved in trying to manage that in a spreadsheet environment. And then the fact is it's an ever-changing environment, right? It's a moving target. Just when you think you've got it right, something changes, whether it's new products or new vendors or a new process in the warehouse, new markets that I'm going into, whatever it might be. It's a really fast-changing, fast-moving environment. So really complicated and really understandable why you might think that a spreadsheet could do this, because it's a pretty cool app. But when you really get into the nitty-gritty and the details of it, really challenging and almost impossible to get it right. So I think we've made our point, right? Using Excel or some combination of Excel and some other manual processes to try to drive your replenishment and buying recommendations and to create what we would call an optimal purchase order is really futile, especially with any consistency over time, again, because of the changing environment. And you've got to be able to purchase the exact right amount of product at the exact right time, every time. That's the goal. That's how you drive more profit out of your inventory investment. So it's a matter of creating a repeatable best practice. And if you're not buying with intelligence and with good data and understanding and visibility what's going on, you'll just never achieve that maximum profit, which is, again, the goal. Here's this huge asset, it's core to our business, and we've got to make sure that we're doing the absolute best job in managing that to drive the profitability that we need. So to do that, you really need a process internally that gives you that control and visibility. And we think there's a couple of key factors here in that best practices model. One is this concept of item classification, really of understanding that your items that you're in your database, maybe you've got 1,000 SKUs, maybe it's 10,000 SKUs or more. We have some customers with millions of SKUs and others with 100 SKUs. So whatever that looks like, how much variety in terms of type and markets and so forth exist within those items. And if you paint every item with the same broad brush and have the same policies around all those items, you're going to hit on some but miss on others, right? There's enough uniqueness typically in our environment where we really have to do a better job of identifying the nature of the items and have distinct and separate policies and approaches for those different classes or categories of items. The whole concept of a safety stock managing what that buffer level needs to be to handle the inherent risks in your supply chain, right? We're gonna predict a future demand, and that's a best guess, and we need to be tracking how well that works. We're also going to be assuming and hoping that our suppliers perform as advertised, right? When they say they've got a 3-week lead time, that it really is a 3-week lead time, or that when I order 100 boxes of something, I don't get 103 or 96 or worse, right? Or 50 of them, and the other 50 are on back order. I need to understand what those risk factors are, and as a result of those risk factors, build proper safety stock levels. I need to get alerts and get ahead of the curve, right? For when I'm about to stock out or when I'm about to have too much, when the next PO arrives that I don't need yet, and so forth. I need to understand that's what we would call a surplus order, so that I can action those things, have my supplier either kill that order or delay the shipment of it by a week or whatever I can do to manage that, et cetera. And clearly your forecasts of future demand have to really be based on good data and good math that really understands things like trends and seasonality and where are the outliers, right? The weird spikes and dips in my demand histories that I can either ignore or understand. Was that a seasonal blip, or is that just something unusual, an anomaly that I need to smooth out to some degree? So good data-based forecasts really help me understand that. So that's how I know what to buy and when to buy it, is when I have an understanding of all these different factors, right? And so you clearly need to have the right tool. And because the wrong tool gets in your way and makes creating those optimal orders just about impossible. The right tool gives you those best practices that we just talked about to establish policies that maximize the profit. So you've got to have the right tool to get to what we would call, here's the definition of an optimized inventory. It's having the lowest possible inventory value with the highest possible service level to your customers. Now, to try to achieve a 100% fill rate, right? This is an exponential curve. So that skyrockets. It's the classic hockey stick. To get to 100% is not possible. It doesn't make sense to have that much inventory, right? You're never going to hit 100%. And for different items within your classes, again, maybe some items are more important than those that have a higher fill rate than others. So you can really manage that and mix and match those things to achieve what we would call an optimal inventory, right? Having the least possible inventory to have the highest possible target to hit your target fill rates for your customers. So, so what does that right tool look like? Well, it's one that gives you that direct access to the data, right? You've got to get access that's accurate and timely to all those pieces of data, and then have some proper analytics and metrics that is devised to give you the insight that you need, right? And the visibility into all those items. And we would argue that really requires a dashboard to put you in control of that, right? You've got to have an easy environment, easy understandable interface that puts you in control, that gives you access and visibility to everything that you need. And then the other key thing, I think, is an ability to manage by exception. Again, if you've got 1,000 or 10,000 or more SKUs, you simply do not have the time in your day, no matter how many buyers or planners you have on your team. If it's just you, or if it's a team of 3 or 4 or more, there is just not enough hours in the day, enough access to all that data to manage everything every day. So you need to be having things bubble up to you to say, hey, here are some emergency items. Here's some items that that require some action right now. And so that management by exception is really critical, so that you can focus where you're going to have the biggest impact. I can't get to everything, so tell me which are the most important things for me to solve right now today. And you'll know you found the right tool, right, when you've got all that working for you, when you've got that access, when you've got that best practices environment that covers all the things that we've just talked about. But I would also point out that even if you have the right tool, it still may not solve the problem if, right? First of all, if implementation is too difficult, right? If it's too complicated, too difficult to understand, too convoluted, too many configurations and tweaks and ifs and buts and too many opinions coming into play. If it's just simply too difficult to implement, then then it's probably not the right tool, right? It may have all these functions, but it's not going to work for you. Or secondly, if it's too expensive. The big guys out there in the distribution world, which the founders of NetStock have worked with for the last 20, 30 years, in some cases together in other businesses before starting NetStock and building the Sage Inventory Advisor tool. Those big guys have got $1 million budgets and they've got degreed supply chain people, right? Master's degrees in supply chain and so forth that are running these tools. So they have the time and the budget and the wherewithal to make these complex, expensive tools work, and they always have. So the big global companies, the Grangers of the world, et cetera, have the answer. But as a small, medium-sized business, that's not an option, right? You've got to have a tool that's affordable and easy to use, that understands your marketplace, but still addresses the challenges. So that's a tough thing to match. I think the other key piece here is, your team has to agree to use it, right? Change is hard. Change management can be really difficult. So even if you've got the right tool at the right budget and the right usability functions and so forth, you still have to have a team that says, yeah, we're going to embrace this. We're going to make this work. And, some of you on this call or listening to this recording later, perhaps, maybe the ones that you yourself invested a lot of time and effort into those current processes and tools, maybe even building some of those very complex spreadsheets. We talk to customers all the time that show us their spreadsheet that they're rightfully very proud of, right? It's really a big effort to get it as far down the road as they have. And here's these 90 columns wide of data and hundreds and thousands of lines long in a spreadsheet, and it's producing these outputs, and I got pivot tables and all this stuff going on. There's a certain pride of ownership there, and I get that. But there also comes a point where you have to say to yourself, look, that's one, maybe not sustainable, right? Because if I go away again, nobody else can use this thing. And it's still not achieving a best practices result, right? What's the net result? I'm still got product that I have too much of, and I still have product that I'm running out of. So it's not solving the problem as well as I would hope. So we have to look at something else. And so making that change can be hard. There's some loss there, some feeling of separation there from my old way of doing things, and habits die hard. That's human nature. But if you can get through that, if you can have a top-down management role that says, folks, I understand this is the way we're going to go forward. We're going to monitor it. We're going to make sure that we're getting good value out of it. And I would involve your advisors at SWK, right? This is a classic perfect use for your trusted advisors at SWK to help you with this process. They know that whole flow. They have the relationship throughout the organization from executive on down to the warehouse. So they can, talk the talk and help you understand what's the right process. And I would really suggest that you leverage SWK in that change management effort. That's not something that at NetStock or a Sage Inventory Advisor that we can do for you. We're product experts. We're inventory replenishment experts. We know all the functionality and features, but we are not able to come on site. We're not going to know your business intimately. We're not going to be able to manage that change for you. That's one that you have to take on and use the right outside resources to help you get there. So let's talk about the NetStock and Sage Inventory Advisor approach. What did we do here to address this challenge? Right. So our team, again, very experienced, long-time demand planning, replenishment experts, world class in that regard, have worked in this space for a long time. They said, okay, if we're going to target the smaller and mid-sized firms, we've got to take maybe 80–90% of that stuff that we've learned from all those big environments, glean that out into an application that works for that target market, right? That delivers those best practices approaches, but is a very affordable and easy to use application in the typical mid-sized business. and that gets us to the goal, right? That's designed to drive that profit out of that big investment in that asset. So that's the approach we took. We built a cloud-based application, so it's on demand anytime, anywhere, any device, right? Any browser can get access to the tool. We've already built the seamless integration into the Sage ERPs, Sage 100 being one of the first ones we built now 8 years ago, right? And our dominant installed version of our application is with the Sage 100. That's our biggest connector or integration. So we've already taken care of that. We grab all the data at the same time, so it's in sync and it's easily done, and it happens automatically at night, overnight, in a very secured environment. So bang, that's done, right? Now what I get back from that, when I grab all that raw data from all those tables and files, is I get a dashboard-driven, graphical, colorful, very interactive application that helps me manage by exception, helps me understand where I've got challenges, how to prioritize those challenges, and what actions to take to solve those challenges. And then importantly, a very rapid deployment with very affordable subscription pricing, right? We can get companies up and running in 3, 4, 6 weeks at the most, typically, for an existing distribution customer. If we're doing heavy manufacturing with lots of bills of materials and production, maybe it's an extra week or two of configuration and testing to make sure that we get there, but very rapid deployment, and very affordable, easy in, easy out type of subscription type model. So with that, I thought what we would do to kind of wrap this up, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. But I thought I would just use a couple of screenshots rather than tempt fate with a live product demo. We'll just walk through a couple of screenshots to give you a feel for what I'm talking about, and then we'll wrap this up here in the next 5 minutes or so. So this is the dashboard that users log into first thing, or multiple times a day, or first thing in the morning, or even for that matter on your tablet at the breakfast table before you even get into the warehouse. I can fire this up and take a quick look at a snapshot. Sometimes we refer to this as a health check of our inventory at this point in time, based on last night's data extraction from the ERP, right? So, so I can quickly see 6 KPIs or key widgets that measure the health of my inventory. The top row tends to be a little bit more inventory oriented, right? What's my current total holding? How much of that is in excess? Where do I have orders coming in that I don't need yet? What we call a surplus order, so stock oriented, right? The second row tends to be more, think of it from a customer perspective, right? What's my target fill rate and how am I doing against that? Where am I already out of stock that's going to cause customer satisfaction problems and maybe churn? And not only where am I currently stocked out, but where do I anticipate that I'm likely to be stocked out before the next shipment arrives, right? So this last column of surplus orders and potential stockouts is where I can really be proactive and get ahead of the curve. I still have time to prevent these problems from occurring. I can call my vendor and say, hold off on that order for a week because I don't need it yet. And when it comes, it's just going to go directly to excess. So hang on to that for me for a week if you can, or whatever, or cancel it or combine it with another PO or whatever the case might be, right? And otherwise, potential stockouts, product that I have in stock today, but we anticipate running out of based on our demand expectations and knowing what we've got on order and what that lead time is when it's expected to arrive, I can project that I'm likely to run out of some items. And in this case, it's the spreadsheet, or rather the dashboard is telling me I've got some 44 items in this condition that are likely to run out and could cost me as much as $388,000 in lost sales, right? Because that's what the demand for these items looks like over that time that I'm going to be out of stock of those items. So here's an opportunity for me to expedite, make sure I have a PO created, first of all, understand when's it coming in, has it been delayed for some reason, and then talk to my supplier and see if there's some way I can get all of it or some of it maybe shipped a little bit faster to prevent this from happening. Right, so really critical that I can get ahead of the curve in some of these cases, but also important to see how am I tracking, right? And you'll notice that I've got a bar chart here for each one of these widgets that show my trend over time. This might be days, weeks, or months, and I typically get 12 periods here where I can see where did I start in the gold, what's my last reading of this particular KPI in the red, and the trends in between for the intervening 12 periods. And then I get a view of the total size of the problem, right? I've got excess stock in the amount of $9.5 million spread across some 2,500 items. And I can click right into this and see that full list if I want to. And once I see that list, I can sort and select and filter, slice and dice that data a million different ways so I can really get a handle, again, very quickly and very easily on what's going wrong in my inventory, right? Because we're taking a status check of every item in every location. And this dashboard, by the way, is for a specific location, whether that's a physical warehouse, could be a virtual warehouse, or it might be just the items that I as a buyer am responsible for, right? There's lots of different ways that I can group and configure what data is represented on this dashboard. And so now, that's my universe that I'm working in, if you will. And now I can see exactly what's going on with those, slice and dice that data. But even beyond that, knowing obviously I can't get to all 2,500 items that are in excess today, but maybe I can focus on what we call our top 5 list, right? Here are the top 5 offenders or contributors to this particular problem. So I can see what the value of that is. And so that my top 5 represents over $500,000 worth of this $9.5 million problem. So if I can solve these today, tomorrow I get a fresh dashboard, work on those, the next day again and again. So with some habit and some discipline, I can't help but see these trends go the right direction, right? I'm going to see this bar chart flow exactly where I want it to, where stock holding is going down, excess stock is going down, stock outs are going down, my fill rates are going up. I'm going to be able to visually quickly see that as a quick snapshot every single day and over time. So every one of these widgets behaves the same way. I've got the graphical bar chart, I've got the total report that I can drill into, and I've got the top 5 list that helps me prioritize where do I have my biggest challenges, the items are going to have the biggest impact on my profitability. So you'll see some other color coding here. Let me go to my next screen. And I've referenced a couple of times here in this presentation this concept of product classification. So what we're going to do in the Inventory Advisor application is rank every item by an ABC value ranking, right? Pretty standard inventory process. Rank every item by value, right? So my most expensive items at cost, and so forth, down to my least expensive items. Then we're also going to take those same items and rank them in terms of speed of movement and give them a low, medium, or high ranking. How fast are these products moving, right? What's their velocity? And then I combine that into this 9-box color-coded matrix. And over here in the upper right quadrant, of course, are my high-value, fast-moving items. These are my bread and butter, no doubt my most profitable items. And I can rank these things by profit margin as well as by cost. So I can analyze that really nicely, actually. So these items in green, bread and butter items, pay most attention to those. These items down here in the lower left in red, slow-moving, low-value items, maybe I question why I even have them. Look, I've got 2,200 of these in my sample data here with $1.5 million worth tied up in inventory. Do I really need to have all 2,200 of those items? Maybe my vendor can manage some of those. So I can make some decisions around that. Or maybe these are nuts and bolts and washers that I need to have for my production process, right? The last thing I want to do is hold up a production line for lack of a nut or a washer. So maybe I just buy these twice a year, buy them in bulk since they don't cost very much, and put them in the corner of the warehouse. The point is I can make some policy decisions because I now have a much better understanding of the nature of the items in my inventory and make some decisions around that. And if I go back to this dashboard, all these green AHs here, for example, these are A items that are high fast movers, and so they're color-coded green. So as I look at, if I've got 5 minutes now before I have to go into a meeting in my company, and I see I've got a stocked out item that's in green, bang, click on that, drill into that, see what's going on, make sure I've got an item, an order on the way, and or do I have it in another warehouse that I can transfer, etc. But again, that color coding really helps me prioritize and understand what's going on there and give me some visibility that I wouldn't otherwise have. And then the last screenshot I want to share with you, this is what our forecasting screen looks like for an individual item. So here's an item, here's the history of that item, how many units I've sold over the last 26, 27 months, right? And here's what we're predicting as terms of a demand forecast going forward. So this is my history in blue. Here's my forecast going forward in gold. I can see this looks like there's maybe a little bit of seasonality there, but I can make adjustments to this, right? As I mentioned earlier, we've got 15, I did mention that we've got 15 different algorithms built into our forecasting engine. Each one of those algorithms are tested every night against these items to see which would have produced the right closest result to what actually happened. So we pick the best fitting algorithm, whether that's seasonality or trending up or down, or whether it needs to smooth out spikes or dips, or there's all these very sophisticated mathematical algorithms, and don't ask me how to interpret any of them, but they work. They're really sophisticated, but they're under the hood. So I don't need to understand them. I just know that Inventory Advisor is finding which is the best fit, applying that to the item, predicting my future going forward. But now as a buyer or planner, I may have some additional understanding that isn't part of my history, right? I know we just signed a big contract with Home Depot, or lost a contract with Costco, or we've got some new product that's going to cannibalize this one, or whatever it might be. I've got some product knowledge, some marketplace understanding, some tribal knowledge that allows me to now make some adjustments to this, and I simply click on amend the forecast, make my adjustments. I can model that and test it, click apply that amended forecast, and now I might have a new purchasing recommendation as a result. So this is just one screen of many. As you can see, all these different tabs. We understand bills of materials down to 99 levels. So if I've got a component of a bill that I also sell directly, I've got two different demand streams there. That's understood and accommodated by Sage Inventory Advisor. If I have a central warehouse environment that I mentioned earlier, where I've got spoke warehouses that are replenished by a distribution center, so that's a demand stream plus what I sell directly out of that distribution center. That's understood and accommodated by the application. We do a great job of tracking supplier performance and lead time performance and so forth, so that we can understand those risk factors and apply a proper safety stock calculation as a result. That's really one of our pieces of secret sauce, is how we create our safety or buffer stock, managing those risk factors and looking at replenishment cycles and lead times. We have the ability to help buyers buy ahead for things like Chinese New Year, or maybe there's a longshoreman strike about to hit the docks, or whatever it might be, or I'm going on vacation as the buyer for 2 weeks. I'm going to go ahead and buy ahead for 2 weeks so that when I come back, I don't have a crisis. So there's all kinds of ability that way on the purchase recommendation, what we call our order schedule, where we go create these orders. And then, by the way, when we create that kind of pro forma order, that ideal purchase of what we need to make based on all this analysis, click a button and it goes and creates automatically the open purchase order for me in the Sage ERP. So no rekeying, no typos, no time spent doing that. I have the environment here in this tool that helps me decide what to buy and how much and when, and click a button and it goes and creates the open PO, and then it follows the standard business rules from there. So really, hopefully you've gotten the message that the semi-automated, semi-manual spreadsheet, custom report, crystal report, dumping to access, or whatever we see out there in the market, all that stuff is, great effort. We appreciate the hard work that went into that, but it is never going to get you to a best practices model. This is a dedicated application designed specifically for this purpose. It's its only reason for being, and it is a game changer in any organization that manages inventory. If you have not taken a look at it, I highly recommend that you talk to your SWK reps and say, hey, I think it makes sense for me to invest 45 minutes for a demo and a discussion to dig a little bit deeper, understand my particular environment, and see if this tool wouldn't help me do this a lot better and free up an awful lot of cash and save me an awful lot of stress. So just a couple final thoughts here, and I'll open it up back to you, Sasha, for some questions. Just a couple quick quotes from some of our customers, which we always enjoy. Jay here talks about this being the best product he's ever used, and he's an experienced guy. He's used a lot of different tools over the years in different organizations, and in this case, they're doing quite a bit of assembly and kitting, so an MRP type environment. Jay's a big fan and really loves what he's doing here. Another quote here talking about the view, the visibility, right, and the visual nature of the application makes it really easy to work with. And a nice shout out to our team that does the implementation and support and training on the app, and we get validation on that all the time. Our folks are literally world-class experts in this area. And then one final quote here from Janine Downs, where she's got a statistic. They reduced their inventory by 38% in just the first few months. And that is, again, not uncommon. We've got all kinds of success stories and anecdotes of customers that have achieved that kind of result while increasing their target fill rate, right? While improving their performance and reducing inventory by huge numbers. So it can happen. So with that, this is my contact information. Again, I'm Russ Graf with NetStock. And notice that our email and our URL is not .com, it's .co. That's not a typo. So russ@netstock.co, and that's my cell number on the screen. Happy to field any calls or emails from you. And then I can recommend one website to go to. It's called inventoryadvisor.co, again, not .com. And that page has lots of content, some other success stories, some literature, some videos, so some really good quality stuff. There's some blog posts from our experts on the team and so forth. So I encourage you to check that out. And again, also strongly encourage you to engage with your contacts at SWK. We've got lots of mutual customers across a lot of different ERP applications. So there's plenty of good results and reference points there as well. So please avail yourself of them. And with that, Sasha, I'll turn it back over to you and see if there's any questions that we can answer before we wrap it up.
Great, thank you, Russ. Before we begin the Q&A, if you do have any additional questions, as Russ mentioned, you can reach out to him with his contact information, and you can also reach out to your CAMs or just email the customer account manager team at camteam@swktech.com if you're not sure who your customer account manager is. So now let's see what questions came in through the Q&A. So this one says, how would the dashboard look if I have multiple warehouses?
Yeah, good question. The dashboard can be configured a lot of different ways. So it can look at a specific warehouse and then just switch from one warehouse to another. So that's very easily done, one click, and you can be looking at different warehouses. Or we have the ability to combine or aggregate any logical combination that makes sense, right? Maybe I'm responsible for 3 warehouses that are in the northeastern region or something along those lines, right? So I can combine those 3 into one virtual view with still the ability to look at each individual warehouse underneath that. So there's lots of ways that we can configure that. But typically, so the dashboard is a defined universe, but we can define that a lot of different ways.
Great. Let's see. The next question we have is, what is the pricing for Sage Inventory Advisor?
Sure. Price is always important, of course, despite the fact that the ROI is ridiculous and off the charts. But the way it's priced is 2 components to it. There's a one-time, what we call an activation fee, which covers the installation and the whole onboarding training process and getting you live. And that price is always $2,250. So it's only $2,200 basically to get up and running and going. And then there's a monthly subscription fee to get continued access to the application. And that number scales or varies based on the size of the inventory. So we go anywhere from $250,000 worth of inventory up to $20, $50, $70 million, whatever that inventory is. And so that monthly price will scale accordingly. I think just to give you an idea, most of our customers are in the $2.5 to $5 million inventory range. And I think that number would be somewhere in the $400 to $500 a month range. If you have $1 million worth of inventory, I think it's under $300 a month. So again, saving you huge dollars, huge out-of-pocket costs, freeing up huge amounts of working capital that can be applied elsewhere in the business, and the multiplier effect of that is massive at a very low monthly cost.
Okay, and our last question is, how long does implementation take, and what is that process?
Yeah, I think I kind of alluded to it earlier, but in most cases, I mean, it's really more dependent on you than us. Our team is very efficient. We've got a well-defined 5-step methodology that we walk people through as our onboarding process. We've now got almost 1,400 companies around the globe, almost 800 of those in North America alone, that we've brought live on the application. So we have a very well-tested, tried and true model and approach and methodology that we follow. And we can be very quick. I mean, the fastest I've seen is 2 weeks. I think for most end users, it's more like 4 to 6 weeks is a typical timeline, just because you've got stuff to do and running your business. You've got some things to learn. You got to get in and practice and play a little bit. You go through that configuration process, which is really the bulk of that time, is configuration and testing. Does that look right? Does that make sense? And then we turn it loose to the rest of the users of the tool. So I would suggest that a reasonable approach in real terms is probably 4 to 6 weeks, and that's probably maybe 30 hours worth of work on the end user's part to get to that point.
So we actually have one more question that came in. They asked, would every user require a license?
Yeah, great question. Again, it does not take a Sage license at all. And our pricing, again, is based strictly on the value of the inventory, unlimited users. So there are no licensing restrictions here at all.
Okay, and we'll wait a few more seconds. If there's any further questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box right now. And again, I will be distributing the recording of this session within the next day or two. And it looks like that is all of the questions. And that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you so much for your time, Russ, and thank you everyone who attended the call today.
My pleasure. Thanks all of you.
Bye.